All right. Yeah, good evening, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. I know yesterday we had a little bit of a technical issue, but we are going to cover Chapter 8 tonight, and we will cover Chapter 9 tomorrow. So, we have a lot that we're going to end up covering today, and so we'll end up getting through, like I said, Chapter 8, and then we will continue with Chapter 9 as well. What I have decided in regards to the class that we had to postpone for yesterday, what we will do is I will have a video, a YouTube video that's going to go over the 1 to 4 family in detail. I think I've still got it saved, and I'm going to upload that to the Google Classroom as well. So that'll be there that y'all can watch, and that'll fill in for the 2 hours that we missed yesterday. So with that being said, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to go ahead and jump into Chapter 8. Now, as you notice here on your screen, we're talking about other real estate matters. Okay, so these are going to be things outside of the norm. Okay, so we're not going through any contracts today. But we are going to we're going to be going through a lot of material. So to start off, what we're going to end up doing, if I can get my mouse to work here, there we go. All right, so our learning objectives for this evening is going to basically be, we're going to describe the current forms and the current forms of fraud and how it affects the licensees and the general public. We will also identify on which forms the broker's fees are going to be agreed upon. Further, we will identify the protected classes under the fair housing laws of Texas. We will also list disclosures that are required, prohibited, and permitted. And we'll also describe HUD occupancy standards. Okay. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started and start off here immediately with what's called flipping. Okay. House flipping is a very normal standard in real estate. A lot of people actually get into real estate for the sole purpose of, I want to flip houses. That's my goal. I want to go in, I want to flip houses, and I want to make profit. That's a good deal, okay? So long as, and the key thing here is so long as the house that you're flipping is going to end up in the situation, it is actually, if you're using cash, it's pretty much okay if you're flipping a house. But when you start using a loan or a mortgage, as we'll talk in finance, you can actually get yourself in a lot of trouble, okay? Because a lot of times when you get a mortgage, there's a certain occupancy requirement or a time frame that you have to stay in the house. And the reason they do this is just like in this situation. If in an example, Mr. Travis, he's a lender, and Mr. Travis goes over and he lends me a loan for, I say, you know what, Travis, I'm going to do a 30-year loan with you, okay? Mr. Travis is going to expect that he's going to get payments for 30 years. Well, if I go take Mr. Travis's money, go purchase Mr. Eugene's house, and I go in and I repaint it and I fix it up and I flip it and I resell it within, say, 6 months, and I got my money back and I paid Mr. Travis back within 6 months, well, Mr. Travis basically didn't make anything. I ain't happy. Okay? And he ain't happy at all. Not by any means, because the fact is, he went over and he turned around and he basically, in this particular situation, Travis has gone over and now here's Travis with no money. He was expecting 30 years and he probably made maybe a few $100s in interest. Okay? So he's not going to be pleased. And here I am, happy as a lark, because I bought Mr. Eugene's house for $100,000, and I flipped it and turned it over to $250,000. I made a $150,000 profit, and Travis made a few $100s. Travis is not going to be happy in that situation. Okay, And we will talk more about that when we get to finance, talking about issues with flipping, okay? There are other ways that there is things that you can do with flipping. There's, like we talked before, there's some mortgage matters that can be involved, but there's a lot of different things that there could be issues, okay? When we talk about buyer rebates, when we're talking about buyer rebates, what buyer rebates is that there are certain things that are being given back to the buyer, okay? Certain benefits, certain monies. Again, in this situation, this could also constitute real estate fraud, because of the fact is that what's ending up happening is the buyer is getting monies in a way to turn around and circumvent the loan, or to take advantage of the lender, or things to that nature, okay? So what happens with this, with buyer rebates, is that there's an issue, okay, that can come up. There's also red flags, and we will talk about those as we proceed throughout this class, and especially when we get into real estate finance. There's a lot of red flags that constitute real estate fraud and what you need to be aware of, okay? So as it says here at the bottom bullet, almost everyone involved in a home buying transaction could possibly be involved. The agents, the mortgage broker, the appraiser, the title company, and unfortunately, the lender is normally the one that's the victim, okay? Previous to all of the regulations that came down back in 2006 and 7 and 8, all these new rules and regulations that came down, used to, a while back, I could be a real estate broker. Miss Linda could end up being a home inspector. Mr. Eugene could be a lender. And Mr. Travis in this situation is a buyer, okay? Now what happens is, back in the day, what would occur was Mr. Travis would come into my office and he would say, you know, hey, Mr. Justin, you know, I'm looking to I'm wanting to purchase a house. Mr. Eugene has a house for sale. I want to buy his house. And so what ends up happening in this situation is, you know, I really want this house, okay? And what Mr. Travis doesn't know is that I am also listing Mr. Eugene's house, okay? So if I'm listing and I'm representing a buyer, I'm what's called an intermediary, basically representing both parties. But what ends up happening here is I want to make the most money out of the transaction, okay? But Mr. Eugene also wants to make the most money. And Mr. Travis, you don't want to lose the sale. So you're willing to do whatever to get Mr. Eugene happy, where everybody's happy, so that we can make this transaction happen. You want the most money, you want the house, I want money. So what we end up doing is I go to Miss Linda, and instead of her being an inspector, she's an appraiser in this situation. Go to Miss Linda and I say, Miss Linda, here's what I need you to do. I need you to appraise, quote unquote, Mr. Eugene's house. Yes, I know his house is only worth $275,000. But if you work with us here and appraise it at $300,000, then Mr. Travis will be able to buy the house. Mr. Eugene will end up getting some money. I get some money, and Mr. Eugene even said he'll give you $10,000 back, Travis, to do those renovations you want. And we'll just do all of this together. And then the lender, Mr. Stephan back here, he won't know nothing about it. And so then what ends up happening here is we'll get all this money and we're all happy, and I'm already out of it after the transaction's done. Mr. Eugene's gone, and you got your house plus $10,000. And Miss Linda, I give you a little bit of money on the side for you doing that for me. Okay? Sound good?
Nope. Sound
good to me. Sound good to everybody, right?
I said no.
Let's do it. But
I overruled on the one here.
We need to find a new appraiser.
We need to.
She's not in our deal.
She's in range. But what happens in this particular situation is that there were real estate agents and brokers that they did that. They had in-staff appraisers, and what ended up happening was they would give kickbacks. They would do these rebates and stuff. And what happened was Mr. Grossman, he may be in Washington, D.C., and he don't know what's going on. And who's he relying on? He's relying on, no, Miss Linda, the appraiser.
Because he knows
Because
I'm
Miss
honest.
Linda is the one that's supposed to be, as an appraiser, his eyes and his ears. That's what an appraiser's job is. Their job is to be the eyes and ears of the lender. So what happens is that we go over and we have this little conspiracy. It's a fraudulent transaction. Because here's what's happened. So Mr. Eugene, your house was only worth $275,000. Miss Linda goes ahead and says it's 300. Okay. So we get it all taken care of. And what happens, God forbid, we had a huge little burst in the bubble in our economy. And what ended up happening? Well, Mr. Travis loses his job and cannot now pay for the house. So now Mr. Grossman says, well, it's $300,000. I'm going to put it on the market for $300,000 and I'm going to end up selling it. That's what I'm going to do. So Mr. Grossman goes, puts it on the market for $300,000, and guess what he finds out?
$275.
The house is only, it was at that time $275, now it's only worth $250.
Uh-oh.
And he loaned $300,000 to Mr. Stahl for a $250,000 house now.
Well, that was $275.
So, right. But see, this situation is, what I'm getting at, is now value has decreased, and now here's Mr. Grossman, who's sitting here going, how am I going to get my other $50,000? Okay. So what happens here is now Mr. Grossman is going to begin investigating, looking into the situation. He's going to look at Mr. Stahl, and Mr. Stahl is going to say, well, Mr. Eugene told me if we work this out, that, he'd give me $10,000 back. So now they start looking at Mr. Eugene. And then Mr. Eugene comes back and says, well, Miss Linda's the one that did it. She's the one that appraised it.
No, I didn't.
And then Miss Linda is going to come back and say, well, I wouldn't have done it had Mr. Nobles not pressured me into doing it. So now what ends up happening is, as it shows right here in this fourth bullet, almost everyone can be involved in the fraudulent transaction. Everybody can be involved. Now, that's a nice, pretty hypothetical. But let me tell you something. Here's the problem, though. This is why 2008, the mortgage industry went pop. Okay? We'll talk about it a lot more in finance when we get to it. But what ended up happening in finance was this. Remember, if you recall from other classes and other discussions we've had, remember I told you, Mr. Grossman does not house his own loans. Mr. Grossman does not, in this situation, he does not hold the loan the entire time. Because if Mr. Grossman's a bank, he doesn't have infinite dollars, okay? Mr. Grossman has maybe $500,000. So that's all he has to his name. He's a new bank. If he hosts your loan for $300,000, he's got to wait 30 years to get his money back, plus the interest.
He's gonna be in a wheelchair.
He'll be out of money, okay? So what happens is Mr. Grossman goes over and he sold that loan off with all of his other loans into these pools, into these networks to secondary lenders. Well, guess who these secondary lenders are? Well, if you have life insurance at all, or you have stocks, or you have things like that, guess what? That debt just got bought by the people, okay? Well, when those debts come back for collection and they cannot collect on those debts, the monies that you've invested in there is no longer worth anything. So, Mr. Eugene, if you went and you spent, you invested 30 years of your life into this certain, say, life insurance policy, and that life insurance policy, say that Mr. Keith is your person for your life insurance, he's been investing your money into this mortgage market that used to be untouchable, would never fail. That's what they always said. Mortgages are the most secured loans. They'll never fall. They'll never falter, ever, 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 ever. Well, Mr. Keith's been putting all your money into a very conservative market that's buying debt for Mr. Grossman, okay? And he's over here buying debt and all, and then all of a sudden Mr. Stahl can't pay. Well, guess what? Now that all that money you've been investing is now basically gone. And it multiplied multiple times, okay? So in these situations, like I tell everybody in this particular situation, it is imperative that when you do this, you've got to understand that a lot of times there were people, and it was really sad to say this, but there were people that ended up that were basically good people that after the mortgage crash, it killed a lot of people. I mean, that's why if you remember back in 2008, 2009, a lot of people were literally going back into Walmart. You saw old people back in Walmart, greeters. It wasn't because they were like, well, I'm sitting at home bored, I want to go to work at Walmart. It was, I have no money. My money has been gone because of fraudulent transactions, because people were ending up lying on their applications. There was brokers that were doing under the scope, under the table type of transactions. There was a lot of kickbacks that were going on. There was a lot of fraudulent deals that were happening. And because of these fraudulent transactions and these fraudulent matters, what ended up happening was we ended up having the mortgage cycle, or the, as they call it, the mortgage bubble burst. Okay. And so you've probably seen a lot of banks end up going out of business. A lot of people end up going into problems. And so eventually what had to happen was the government had to step in and say, we have to we got to put a stop to this. And to do that, we have to step in now. Okay. And so they stepped in and they started regulating the entire economy. They started regulating a lot of different things. And so now it's extremely difficult for people to get loans. Okay. Used to back in the day, Mr. Eugene, if you wanted to get a loan, you went down to your bank, filled out an application. They may or may not verify that you were even employed. You can go down there and say, I work in McDonald's and they pay me $150,000 a year. They may or may not even review it.
Sometimes
Okay.
you can just call the bank and they give it to you.
And sometimes, yes, sometimes you could call the bank, you were known there, and they would just take you at your word, and they would cut you a check. Okay. But the thing is, in this situation, is because of so many people doing that and it being very lax, what happened was they had to put a stop to it. They had to put a stop to the situation because there was a lot of things going on under the table that were basically putting the lenders at bay in regards to, now how do I continue my operations? Mr. Grossman, he gave out $500,000 only to find out that every loan that he did was worthless. And he lost his entire $500 investment, just gone. $500,000 investment, just gone. Okay. So in that situation it's extremely important that you understand when we're talking about real estate fraud, it is a very serious matter. It's not something that we're going to take lightly. And that's why now in finance, you'll notice that the finance book is more thicker than the law of contracts book, because the finance book has so many now red flags. Okay. So many things you got to go through. Your lenders, I'll tell you this right now for a fact, for those of you that are practicing or those of you going to be practicing, while your client is in a transaction, your lender or their lender, your buyer's lender, will be called, or their employer will be contacted at least 3 times. They will contact them at pre-approval, they will contact them mid-transaction, and they contact them normally the day of or day before closing. And if your client loses their job the day or day of or day before closing, guess what? That deal is dead on its face.
What if they go ahead and they have a job, and then when the second time they lose their job, but the day of or the day before they have a job?
If they lose a job, so if they first call and they get approved, and they get approved for the loan, and you go and you get about halfway through it, and they lose their job, it is always imperative. A lot of real estate agents will tell their people, don't call the lender, don't call the lender, don't call the lender. Biggest mistake you can do, the lender's gonna find out. Okay, you need to call the lender and tell the lender, hey, I just lost my job, I am seeking another one. What do you advise me to do? And some lenders will say, we'll give you a day or 2 to find a job, or some will say we'll give you 4 or 5 days. But in the situation is, as a real estate agent, your duty, if your client loses a job, you need to just cancel the deal. You need to just get it done, cancel it, back out, get them stable again, and put them back into another house. Because the problem is, in that situation, if they lose their job, Mr. Grossman can tell you, I harped to him, make certain that they don't lose their job. Make certain, because if they lose their job, they're stuck in this contract. They can't get out of this contract. That is one of the key things, is we got to make certain that they stay at their job and they don't lose it, which means your client can't, and I had a client like this before. The guy was always tardy to our meetings. Every time I had to do a showing with him, he was always late. I tell him, okay, meet me there at 4 o'clock. 4:45, here he comes. Okay? When a client is like that, when you're showing them, how do you think they are as an employee?
Not very good.
Probably the same way. Okay? They not getting to work or whatever. And he was always late and always had a gut feeling. I was like, something just ain't right here. Something just ain't right. Okay? And so what ended up happening was we put an offer in, everything, did the whole transaction, got halfway through it, and sure enough, he got terminated from his job. The reason for termination was consistent being late to work. Okay? And at that point, I thank God I was still under option period. I was able to bag him out of it. But the problem was that I had found out after the fact that he had been consistently late, not only this job, but about 10 previous jobs. He had 10 previous jobs in the last year. Okay? He would go in, he'd work for a little bit and late. Go in and work, late. And the key thing with that is if you're continually going to be tardy, you're going to lose a job. So that's why I tell a lot of people is you have to assume, you got to look at your clients, because how they are with you is normally a reflection of how they're going to be throughout the transaction. Yes, Ms. Miller.
What if you pass that option period?
Well, then
and
they're
you
stuck in
lose
the
it?
contract. And
and
if
you
they
lose your
lose
job?
it, Mr. Stahl, if you lose your job after options, you're pretty much what? Screwed. There you go. Okay? Because in that situation it's pretty difficult for you to say, because see, that's intentional. Say Mr. Grossman's your client. Mr. Grossman comes in, he's always late to you. You get him under contract, you get through options, and he's still constantly late to work every single day. Every day. Okay? Well, what happened? Well, it's too late. He's already, Mr. Eugene. He goes to Mr. Eugene every day. He's 30, 45 minutes late every day. Mr. Eugene's going to walk in one day and say, you're out, you're fired, you're done. And Miss Linda, you're going to say, well, Mr. Linder, can y'all do something? Nope, there's nothing we can do because that's an intentional act. He's intentionally going to work late. It's not an excuse. So in that situation, it's not justifiable for him to end up, he was not terminated or let go because of COVID or something like that. He was let go because he was continually late to work. And because of his continual lateness to work, he now ends up, it's intentional, he can't just back out of the contract. So now in that situation, there could be a situation where he's in breach of contract and will be sued. And then they're going to come back and say, well, you didn't tell me that.
No,
Sorry.
But if he had COVID though,
It's a different story if he had a medical condition. But if he is continually just purposely coming to work late because he's partying all night and going to bed late, that's intentional. Okay? But if it is, he's got a medical condition or a family member die or something, that's stuff out of your control. But you going to work on time, that's in your control. So, and I've dealt with clients like that before. Okay? So you'll have things like that when you're working in this industry. It just happens. All right. Now, talking about risk management, okay? In my office, I have a very strict policy on CYA, okay? What's CYA, Miss Linda?
Cover your ass.
Exactly. You have to document everything. Guys and gals, remember, I deal with a bunch of newbies. I train a lot of new people. I help new people. And that's my thing. I deal with the newbies because of the fact is I enjoy watching them grow. I like to watch them get successful in this industry. But the key thing in this industry is that you have to document everything. One of the key things is, like I had a meeting with my people the other day. I told them, I said, guys and gals, it's not that I'm being mean. It's not the fact that I'm being hard. It's the fact of the matter is TREC requires that I have to have documentation of everything, okay? There is some people that get to the extent, guys and gals, that they document even phone calls. Once their agent gets off the phone, the agent has to get into that client's folder and dictate what the phone call is about, okay? Now, the key thing about that, though, in this industry is it's very difficult to do that. Because let me ask you, Mr. Grossman, how many phone calls you probably dealt today, sir?
Quite a few.
Quite a few. If you had to document or dictate each one of those, would you have been able to do anything else
I
today?
wouldn't gotten any other work done.
No other work. Miss Linda, how about you? If you had to dictate every single phone call that came in today?
Ain't no way we have 3 phones to answer.
That's right.
sometimes. No
That's
way.
right. So in that situation is you have to document as much as you can. Now I will tell you, as a broker, I've had to go with some of my agents, or not really go to court, but I've had to actually deal with some matters. And there was times that the attorneys would call me and say, Mr. Nobles, we need every single thing that, say, Mr. Stahl did in that transaction. We need every single phone call he made, every single email, everything. We need to see it all. Okay? And so, yeah. So in that situation is, guys and gals, I've had it because of the fact is, where literally I've had it on both sides. I've had it where my one agent was very, very OCD and kept everything. Kept every little detail, every phone call. She had everything perfectly neat, and she handed it to me, and we sent it over. And then I had another agent who we always were pulling teeth to get the information from them. And that individual their client got sued, and the agent turned around to me and was like, what do we do? I said, well, I need all your information. And they're like, well, all I got's a contract and the HUD statement, settlement statement. Well, where's the emails? Where's the stuff? I don't know. Well, guess what? Had they had all the stuff, and I recall the information, had they had all their stuff, their client would have won. But because they didn't have the stuff, guess what? Their client lost. I lost over $10,000, which then that client turned around and sued that person and turned around and, of course, sued me. And I turned around and I said, pursuant to my policies and procedures manual and my contract with them, they're supposed to turn over all documents to me within 3 days. And I've tried. It's one thing if, say, for example, Miss Linda, she was sending me the stuff, and she's working with me and it got lost. Okay, that's my fault. That's Justin's fault. I lost that. But if Miss Linda is not sending me the documentation, that's on Miss Linda. Okay? And if I have multiple emails showing that Miss Linda and I requested it and Miss Linda would not submit it, that's all for me. That's why I tell people all the time it's imperative that when you're doing as real estate, you keep everything. Guys, even when I'm in a transaction, I'm screenshotting text messages. Okay? I screenshot text messages because the fact is you're going to need it. You got to cover yourself. Today, I ended up, Mr. Grossman, don't say the client's name, but what were you about to do? And I said, no, you might want to shred that in video. What were you doing, sir?
I was sending in a social security card and driver's license, a copy of it.
And you're before we talked, you were going to do what? Just do what with it? You're just going to shred it, right?
Yeah.
But what did I tell you to do?
You told me to take a video of me shredding it.
Why would I tell you to do that?
Because then I have evidence that I disposed of it properly.
That is correct. So the key thing is, especially with the client you're dealing with right now, is he very picky?
Extremely.
Extremely. So he could have came back on you and said, well, my social security or my identity got stolen. You stole it. Well, what can he now go back and do? Here's a video of me shredding your deal. I don't have it. I don't have the piece of paper. And Mr. Grossman said, well, should I text that to him that I did? I said, no. Because if you text it, say that was your information, Mr. Stahl, and he's videoing it shredding, and then he texts it to you, what would you then say? Well, who else did you send this to?
Yeah.
Who else did you go send this to? Did you send this to 10 other people? So the key thing is Mr. Grossman was saving that for his own documentation. He's covering himself because of the fact is that's your duty. Okay? Whenever a client tells you, destroy it, just destroy it. You video how you destroy it. Okay? And then if they ask, would you like a copy of the video? And they say yes, then you send it to them. Okay? But you don't want to just voluntarily send it to them unless they ask for it. Okay? because especially when it comes to social security numbers, Miss Linda, if you gave Mr. Grossman a copy of his social or your social and your stuff, what would you end up doing, Miss Nobles?
I would
You want to know if it's been shredded, or you care?
I would want to know what he's going to do with it after he finishes with it.
Exactly. Okay. That is some of the things that it's your job, is you document everything and you cover yourself.
And
Okay.
I don't normally ask for that.
That's right. And I'm just going to be realistic with you. When you're dealing with stuff, stop sometimes and ask yourself, if I have a person's driver's license and social security card, if I was that person, if I'm the one that gave Mr. Grossman that information, what are some things, if Mr. Grossman was in getting my information, he should stop and think, well, what could Justin say to me in regards to this? Well, shoot, Justin could turn around and say, I stole his identity, or I did this, or I did that. Well, then I need to make certain that I've destroyed that. And it's been videoed, so I have documentation to review whatever Justin says. Okay? So in that situation, now, yes, I could still come back and say, well, that's just him videotaping the deal that he shredded, but he's probably made 5 copies before he shredded. Okay? But again, the intent there was that he was destroying it. Now, could he have done it? Yes, he could have made 50 copies, 100 copies, but he didn't. But the thing is you always got to think, how can I cover myself? So how did Mr. Grossman cover himself today? Not only did he record it, but who also was watching him while he was destroying it?
More likely, you broke it.
Me. I was watching him destroy it. So if anybody says that Mr. Grossman made copies, now he has a witness that can say what?
He has a witness.
I saw it. I saw him destroy it. There were no copies. There was nothing around to my knowledge. So at that point, now we're both at ease here. You see what I'm saying here? Okay. You also want to disclose everything to the lender. Representing the buyer does not include helping them cheat the lender. I've had people that have tried that with me before. Well, I got this money hidden over here, and I don't really want to tell the lender and and I'm like, I ain't going to deal with that. You just disclosed it to me, so I'm telling the lender. I'm sorry, I have a duty. Okay. Travis walks into my office and Travis says, hey, Justin, I got 100,000 sitting at my house, but I don't want them to know about that because I don't want them coming after it. So let's not say nothing about it. Okay. Well, technically, I'm going to have to disclose that. Even though I do have a buyer's representation with Travis, I also have a duty to the lender as well. Okay. So in that situation is you have to disclose everything to the lender. If you are not certain about it, you talk to your broker and let your broker tell you what to do. But I'm going to tell you, in some situations is you want to, if you're going to make a call, a broker says to do something, you want to make certain if it doesn't feel right, if it goes back to one of those red flags, then you need to question the broker and ask them. That's one thing about me. An agent comes, talks to me. I try to explain. If I say no, don't send that to the lender, I try also to say why. I don't just say, Travis, no, don't send that to the lender, and walk off. I'll say, Travis, no, don't send that to the lender because technically it's not a requirement that has to be sent. Now, if Mr. Travis told me there's $100,000 hiding somewhere, probably need to disclose that. Okay? So very important in those situations. Now,
I wish I had that.
be sure everything is accurate on the closing documents. This is extremely important, guys and gals. I've dealt with this before. Okay? When you get your HUD settlement statement, make certain by all means that everything that is on the closing documents are accurate. Whatever's on the closing documents must be accurate. Okay? So when you get that HUD settlement or that closing disclosure, you need to go through it with the fine point pen and just make sure all the numbers round. I can't tell you how many times I have caught the title company messing up on the closing disclosure, where they're giving credits to the seller and debits to the buyer and vice versa. Okay? You need to make certain that everything is accurate on the closing documents. If you believe that your transaction is involved in an illegal activity, you need to withdraw from that transaction immediately. A lot of real estate agents think that once I'm in a transaction, I'm stuck in that transaction. That is complete BS. Okay? You can withdraw from the transaction. Okay? Again, what ends up happening is that if you feel something's not right, as a real estate agent, not as a broker, but as an agent, say that Mr. Eugene feels something's just not right, and Mr. Stahl is his broker. He needs to go first to Mr. Stahl and say, Mr. Stahl, I just don't feel something's right with this transaction. I don't know if this guy's trying to pull a fast one on me. I don't know what's trying to happen or what they're trying to do. It just doesn't feel right to me, Mr. Eugene. What do you want me to do? If Mr. Eugene is money hungry and he's like, oh, Travis, who gives a crap about it? You close that deal. I need that money. Okay. If you feel that you are not being heard, meant to say Mr. Travis was your broker, Mr. Eugene, not you. Mr. Travis said, oh, I need my money, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Eugene, if you feel at that point that you're not being heard, then you have a right to withdraw from the transaction and terminate from your broker. Okay? So Mr. Eugene could go in there to Mr. Travis and say that. Mr. Travis says, no, I want that deal to close, blah, blah, blah. If you still feel that it's illegal, you can withdraw from the transaction and quit the brokerage and walk away.
Man, I've been waiting for to hear news like that.
Yep. Uh-huh. Is that Miss
Don't
Linda,
let
right?
me live.
You ain't going nowhere.
So-
My workplace.
Boy, that sounds
Do we
familiar.
have an HR department?
You document it?
Yeah.
Sound like somebody
So
else I know.
again, what happens is you want to tell the seller that if he or she intends to continue with the transaction, they need to seek legal advice. So if at any point that you feel wrong, you need to, this is very key. This is extremely key as a sales agent. You must, okay, you got to understand something. Things that you're dealing with, the people that you're dealing with, remember, you are an agent of your broker. You do not do anything willy-nilly on your own choice. Say, for example, that Mr. Eugene, you go in there, you feel like something's illegal because you just feel like it. And you just go in there and say, Miss Linda, you are illegal and you should go to jail and you're a scumbag and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And you start doing that and you haven't talked to your broker, you could have just opened your broker, Mr. Travis, up to a lot of liability. Okay? You as an agent do not, in any shape or form, willy-nilly just say, I'm going to do this. I'm willy-nilly, I'm going to do this type of stuff. You can't do that. Okay? It is the responsibility of the broker to make that call. Now, if you talk to Mr. Travis and Mr. Travis says, oh, I don't give a crap. I just want to end up make the money. I don't give a crap if they're illegal or not. At that point, Mr. Eugene, then you have to make a decision. Do I stay with Mr. Stahl and continue the transaction, or do I end up saying, you know what? I just don't feel comfortable here. I'm going to step away from the transaction. Okay? But again, the key point in this whole situation is that you want to understand. You as a real estate agent must talk to your broker. I cannot tell you how many brokers that I talk to that they end up, they're like, I just wish my agents would talk to me. A lot of agents, they get their license, they get sponsored, and then guess what ends up happening?
They go out and do their own
You
thing.
never hear from them again. They're gone. They do their own thing. Okay? And truthfully, under the the independent contractor agreement that's signed, that's a big no-no. It's actually grounds for termination. Okay? But unfortunately, nowadays, because of how the current setup is of brokerages, basically people just kind of let them do what they want, just because the fact is they don't want to lose agents. They'd rather justify liability. Okay? But that's not good business. Not good business in any ways. You want to make certain as real estate, and if I was teaching a brokerage class, this is where I'd be telling you, if your agents aren't following your directions, you terminate them, period. You don't look at it as the monies. Mr. Grossman's out willy-nilly doing whatever he wants. I don't care if he's making me $1 million or not. Mr. Grossman's gone because that $1 million he might have made me, I may get sued for $3 million. Okay? So you got to be aware of those situations. Now, under Dtpa, we talked a little bit about Dtpa in the Law of Contracts class, and I love Dtpa. I love it because the fact is it kind of levels the playing field. Okay? Levels the playing field for those that end up have a lot of money, for those that don't have a lot of money. Okay? Dtpa is basically Deceptive Trade Practices Act. Okay? Again, it is a Consumer Protection Act. It's not a basically a person that's selling. It's the person that's consuming the
They
product.
asked that on the test too.
Oh, yes, they will definitely ask you on this, the
Yeah, they ask if
DTPA.
it protects the consumer or the agent.
That is correct. And it's the consumer, like Mr. Grossman said, it will ask you on the test, does this protect the consumer or the agent? And the answer is the consumer, not the agent, okay? In this particular situation it is an important consideration in fraud that involves the licensees. And if you notice here, it doesn't just say real estate agent. It says the word licensees, because the fact is it applies to anybody that holds a license. So no matter if you're a real estate agent, a real estate broker, an appraiser, home inspector, or anybody else that's licensed, it's subjected against you, okay? So any false, misleading, or deceptive acts or practices in any advertisement, offering a sale, selling, or leasing of any real or personal property can be unlawful, okay? So, for example, Mr. Stahl, he decides, you know what? I got an idea. I need to get leads. My broker said I need to come up with an idea and be creative about getting leads. I got it. I got it. Eureka. I know what I'm going to do. I know how I'm going to get my leads. I'm going to go and get a real estate sign from my broker, and I'm going to get like 10 of them, and I'm going to go around to all my aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandparents, everybody, and I'm just going to put a sign in their yard. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go put a sign in their yard. And I'm just going to go around and put them in there, and then, I'm just going to tell grandma and aunt and uncle and all, y'all don't have to sell. We're just going to put it in there because I'm trying to get buyers off of it. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. I got it. Well, here's the problem. So Mr. Stahl does that. And Mr. Colton, one day, he's driving around, minding his own business, and him and his girlfriend see a house that they love. And it happens to be one that Travis put a sign out. So Mr. Colton gets out, and he looks around and looks at the property, and Travis's uncle walks out and says, "Get the hell off my property! Get out of here, Colton! Get out of here!" And he's like, "But what? I'm wanting to get out of my property." "Well, you have it for sale." "No, that's just for my nephew to get some leads. Hey, I ain't selling my property. Get out of here."
That sounds like my uncle.
Okay. Yeah. Tell him get out of here, right? Well, here's the problem is, was it in any situation, was it false, misleading, or deceptive?
Yeah.
Every one of them. Because it was false. He is not intending to sell. It was misleading because Mr. Colton's just driving down the road thinking it's there. It's a bait and switch, it's a bait and switch scheme. Was it deceptive? Yeah. He was being deceptive in that transaction or in that advertising. So what happens here is you cannot, as a real estate agent, you cannot just go over there and throw a sign up in a yard. And just for the sole purpose of ending up going over and trying to end up getting leads. Okay? A lot of people, the sad part, Travis, a lot of people still do it. There's been times that I've seen things on the MLS. There's one listing, I believe, it's been on the MLS almost over 2,000 days. The guy's not selling the property. What he's done is he's shot the price so high and he knows it's not going to sell. He's just trying to get calls off of it. But now here's something that is legal. If Travis went and he talked to all of his aunts and uncles, and he went over and talked to his uncle, Mr. Darren, and said, "Hey, Uncle Darren here, I'm going to put a sign in your yard to sell your house." And Darren says, "Yeah, no, Travis, I'm not interested in selling." And he says, "Well, Uncle Darren, what would be a price you would sell your house for?" "Well, I bought it for $200. I guess I'd sell it for $275, maybe $280. If he literally and legitimately says that he would actually do it, and he signs a listing agreement, and he's willing to legitimately sell it if a offer came in, there is no DTPA applies because he's willing to sell it. But if you go up there, Travis, and go, "Wink, wink," you'd agree, right? Wink, wink. That's being deceptive, misleading, and false, and that's going to be DTPA. And the biggest reason why DTPA is a big deal is because it can involve 3 times the actual damages that you cause. So whatever the damage was, you multiply it by 3. Okay? So in this situation is I have agents that'll ask me sometimes. They'll say, you know, my mom and dad are thinking about selling their property. I was wondering, you know, I know that they bought the house 2 years ago for 150 and they want to sell it for 300 this year. And my response is, nope, DTPA is going to apply. Because the problem is, if you just bought the property recently for 150, it is not, you're way over your price range. But if you're sold it, if they bought it for 150 and they wanted to sell it maybe at 195 or 200, that's not really too crazy, because you never know when a cash buyer might come in and actually pay $200,000 for a $150,000 transaction. Okay, but if they're trying to double or triple, that's where you're ending up. You could run into Gtpa claims. Okay. The amendment in 2011, it did reduce. It was basically to reduce the frivolous lawsuits by providing that the DTPA does not apply to claims arising from an act or omission by a licensee, with certain exceptions. Okay, so an express misrepresentation of a material fact that cannot be characterized as advice, judgment, or opinion is one of the exceptions to the rule. A failure to disclose information concerning goods or services that was known at the time of the transaction, if the failure to disclose such information was intended to, and here's that word, induce the consumer into a transaction which the consumer would not have entered had the information been disclosed. That's one of those situations is, if I know there's termites in a house, okay, or if I should have known, that's another thing I love most of the time. The seller will tell me, love this, love it, love it, love it. Seller goes in, and seller tells me, says, well, I didn't know there was termites in the house. You didn't? No, I didn't know there's termites. Well, how in the world do you not see all these ants walking around here with wings on them? How do you not notice all these holes in the walls? How do you not notice these things? Well, I never saw them my entire life. Well, the problem is that in this situation is, was it or should it have been known? Do you see what I'm saying? If a normal lay person, meaning if Mr. Eugene happened to be there and he lives in that house, like I always tell people this all the time, you walk in a house and a client spots it, guess what? It should have been known. Okay? You take a client in a house immediately. I love this all the time. I get a seller's disclosure and I go through it, and there's nothing wrong with foundation. Nothing wrong with foundation. Okay? You open the door, you walk in, and you go, whoops. Or you'll be in a property and you feel like you're doing this as you're walking. Okay? What's happening is that the floor sometimes will bow. Sometimes if I'm going into a house, especially pier and beam, if I'm going to do a pier and beam showing, I take a ball with me. Most of the time I take a little golf ball or I'll take a baseball. Okay? Now, why in the world is Mr. Nobles going to a house with a golf ball or a baseball?
To see if it's gonna roll.
Because you're crazy.
Because I'm crazy. Because the fact of the matter is I'm going to take that ball and I'm going to set it on the floor, and I'm going to see if that ball does what?
It's gonna roll.
It's going to roll one way, another way, or is it just going to sit right there? Okay. Now, the reason you got to make certain that you use the right type of ball is because what happens if you have shaggy carpet?
It won't do it.
It won't do it. That's why in that situation is if it's got shaggy carpet, you have to end up, the next best thing is you take a long ruler, okay? And you take a very long ruler and you set it on one part and you hold it, and guess what you're going to notice on towards the end of it?
It's gonna bow up.
It's going to stay up while the ground goes down, okay? That's another method of how you can do it, is you can end up, you can keep that ruler and you can watch it kind of edge off, okay? So again, A failure of any disclosure of information concerning that good or service that was known or should have been known at the time of the transaction and it was not disclosed, then in that situation, the transaction with the consumer would not have entered in and had the information been disclosed, okay? This is my favorite one. An unconscionable act, okay? What does that word unconscionable mean to you, Mr. Garrett? What is unconscionable? What's that sound like to you, sir?
Like no one would have ever thought you would do it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to put next to it, it's a shock. You ever got one of those phone calls and you answer the phone call and you're like, what? They did what? That's unconscionable. Okay? It's something in the situation is, if Miss Linda, I want to ask you this question. You're my office manager here. Miss Linda, I want to ask you a question. What if I called you and I said, hey, Miss Linda, I wanted to let you know, Travis ended up, he knew that there was termites. And remember we told him that he was supposed to end up disclosing that, and he ended up not disclosing that. And now the whole thing, they're basically suing. What would your reaction been to that?
What was he thinking?
Uh-huh. Yeah. And it wouldn't have been that nice. It'd been, what? That's exactly how she is when she gets, what?
Yeah, Travis
you know,
in the office now.
Uh-huh. He did what? Yep. And yeah, that's right. That's exactly how it goes, Stefan. That's exactly right. So in that situation it's an unconscionable act. It shocks the court. You know? It's kind of like one of those things if I said, hey, Miss Linda, Garrett was going to a property to put a sign out and he ran through the house.
What's his problem with that?
Yeah. There's problem. Okay.
Why did he do that?
But in that situation it's an unconscionable, it shocks the court. Okay. So an unconscionable act or course of action that cannot be characterized as advice, judgment, or opinion. Okay? I'm giving advice, judgment, or opinion. But now here's the key word with advice. I want y'all to understand something. Key word with this word advice here. If you are saying to be given advice, what type of advice is an attorney going to say you were trying to give?
Legal.
There you go. They're going to say, well, Mr. Stahl was trying to give, he's going to say, well, I was giving advice. And the attorney's going to say, well, he was giving illegal advice. Okay? Big no. Okay? A judgment or an opinion. It's better to say I was giving my opinion than to say I'm giving a client advice. Because is there such a thing as legal opinion? Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. A legal opinion can be right or wrong. Just like a broker price opinion. I could go outside right now and point at a house and say, okay, everybody, how much does this house is worth to you? Miss Linda, you may say it's worth nothing. Mr. Eugene may say it's worth $500,000. Mr. Stahl may say it's worth $150,000. Are any of you wrong?
No.
No, because it's an opinion. It's an opinion. You can't be wrong in an opinion. Okay? Now, what are some of the recoveries under Dtpa? If we find out that Mr. Grossman is violated the Dtpa, what are some recovery options? Well, first one is there can be economic damages. Okay? Now, economic damages, these are easy. These are easy. If I sell a house to a client and I know that there's termites, and I end up in a situation, I know that there are termites in the property, but I don't disclose it to Mr. Grossman. I don't tell Mr. Grossman that there's termites in it. Well, Mr. Grossman has to end up, he's got to get an exterminator out there. He's got to get somebody to do termite treatment. Mr. Grossman, can you actually add up how much it's going to cost you? Yeah, you can. Because what? You got receipts, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you sit there and add up all your receipts, see how much debt it cost you. Okay? So that's what's called an economic damage. Mr. Grossman actually has the receipts to show exactly how much he has ended up racked up in debt. So because I lied to him, he sues me under Dtpa. There are $12,000 worth of damages. Well, guess what? He's going to sue me for $3,000 because it's under Dtpa. So Mr. Grossman, that $12,000, you're going to get an award for $36,000 from me because I intentionally did not disclose it to you. Okay, I hid it from you. So that's an economic damage. Now, a mental anguish. Can you really put a value on mental anguish?
No.
Can you go up there and open up Mr. Steffen's brain, look at his mental thoughts, and put a weight on how much damage there are?
No.
No, you can't. So in that particular situation is under mental anguish, Mr. Grossman may end up saying, Your Honor, not only did I suffer $12,000 in actual economic damages, but Your Honor, I suffered another $12,000 in mental anguish because I had to go around and I had to, I had to go over here, I had to pack everything up, I had to throw it or move it in storage, and I had to go run around, and I'm trying to work a job, and I'm trying to juggle kids, and I'm trying to go over here and do this, and I'm trying to do that, and this and that, and it was so much on me. So I'm suing Mr. Nobles, Mr. Justin, for $24,000, 12 in economic and 12 in mental anguish. Okay? And if he wins, he gets his $24,000 times 3. Okay? Now, where do you think most judges, where they cut a lot of things from? Mental anguish. Because what can I come back and say? Yes, Your Honor, I did screw up. I should have told him about that. I made a mistake. Your Honor, I made that mistake, and I do own up to the $12,000 in damages. I'm apologetic about it. But my thing is Mr. Grossman, how did he not notice the ants flying around and swarming and all of this? And he's talking about kids and all of this stuff when he's got a babysitter and they go to school 8 to 5, and he's got all this. Well, what's the judge going to say? The judge is probably going to look back at Mr. Grossman and say, Mr. Grossman, we all have to deal with crap sometimes in life. So just going to let you know, we'll give you the $12,000, but we ain't giving you no mental anguish. If you're in Texas, especially in a conservative area, you're not going to get much mental anguish. You may get $1,000, $2,000 bucks, but that's it. Okay? And sometimes they will only give 3 times damages on economic, but not on mental anguish. But it depends. Okay? Depending on the county you're in. If you're in a very liberal county, they may want to make an example out of me. So they may end up giving him the full 24,000 times 3. They may want to make an example out of Justin. Okay? So again, it comes into that situation is you got to look at this from different views. Now, of course, damages increase if the defendant committed the act knowingly. That's a very key point there. You just know it. That's why a lot of times I try to tell people, don't tell me nothing. Because the minute you tell me, guess what happens?
You're into it.
I'm part of it. Don't tell me nothing. I'd rather act dumb. Okay? So if you just happen to know, it'd be 3 times damages. But if you you intentionally knew it, like I said, I intentionally did not tell Mr. Grossman about the termites because the fact is I knew that it would kill the deal. And I needed the money to pay my child support. So in that situation is, I went over and I did it so I could pay my child support so I didn't go to jail. Well, guess what? I got out of one solution and did what? Got into something else. Okay? Now, if you notice here, the civil penalties of up to $20,000 per violation and up to $250 for violations against elderly. So if I go over and Mr. Grossman is, say, 50, 60 years old, and I take advantage of Mr. Grossman, look how much of a difference there is. If I take advantage of Mr. Stahl, who's in his 30s, we'll say, maybe up to $20,000 maximum. But I go screw Miss Linda here. How old is she, by the way?
Just keep talking.
90? Okay, 90 years old.
Stop it.
So if I was to go over here to Miss Linda here and she's older then I'd have 250,000 that they could sue up to for the same thing, for the same violation. Because of the fact is why people like to prey on who?
Elderly.
The older people. So they want to end up in that situation. They want to make certain that they make an example out of the individuals that take advantage and prey on the elderly. Okay. Now you'll notice here, Mr. Stahl and Mr. Grossman, I want y'all to read this real quick. What does box 3 here, bullet 3 say on this slide for me? Say it out loud for me.
A broker's errors and omissions insurance policy will not cover fraud or intentional violations of the Dtpa.
So that means that policy that I have that protects y'all does not cover you. I had an agent before say, well, what do we need to do? Do we need to get general liability? And I said, we got a problem if you're asking that question. Okay? But the thing is that in this particular situation, is that the errors and omissions insurance does not cover fraudulent or intentional violations. Okay? If you're going to go over and you're going to be fraudulent in any shape or form, if you're going to, if you're looking for an insurance policy that's going to cover you, good luck. Like I told somebody before, I said, yeah, I can go get general liability, I can get umbrella policy, get a bunch of different policies, but they still are not going to cover fraud or intentional violations. That's why I tell you, it's very important in these situations. And that's one area that your broker really is not, that's where you're going to be at, kind of in a crossroads with your broker. Because what happens is say an example that Mr. Colton goes over and he ends up, say for example, he is not doing what he's supposed to. He's not talking to Miss Linda. He's not disclosing information to Miss Linda, and he intentionally causes a transaction to close that should not have closed. And then after he gets called, he calls and he says, oh, I want my broker to protect me. Well, at that point, it's too late. Because what's going to happen is when I go in as a broker, if they are not working with me, they're working against me. And at that point, there is no coverage. And at that point, it now comes down to he said, he said. If I'm Mr. Colton's broker, I'm going to say, Your Honor, Mr. Colton wouldn't do what I told him. He wouldn't provide any information. He hid it from me. Wouldn't work with me, Your Honor. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? I did everything I could. My office manager called a million times. He wouldn't talk to her. He wouldn't call her. None of that stuff. It is imperative that you work hand in hand as a team with your broker and not against your broker. Okay? Because your errors and omissions that you can have $1 billion policy. That ain't covered. You're on your own. Okay? And that means even for the 3%. So you go over here and you get sued for $250,000 times 3. What does that come out to, Miss Linda?
Quite a bit of money.
$750,000, Miss Linda. So you want to pay $750,000 out of your pocket? Nobody does. Not me or anybody. Okay. Now, this is something that you need to be extremely aware of. We're moving on from fraud and all. We're moving into broker's fees. They love to ask you this question on the test. The broker fee is included within the contract. True or false? I got 2 false in here. False. False. They're correct. It is false. Okay? It is not covered within the contract. Okay? It is going to be covered in a few different documents. If you are representing the seller, then it's going to be covered in the listing agreement. If you are representing a buyer, it will be stated in the buyer's agreement. Miss Linda, if Mr. Stahl is representing the tenant, what agreement does he or where is he entitled, ma'am? What's his entitled agreement? How's he get paid? What type of agreement? There's only 2 agreements that are in there. The
Buyers.
Because it's called the buyer's tenant
Yeah, buyer's.
representation agreement. So if you're representing a tenant, it'll be in the buyer's representation agreement. If you're representing a landlord, it'll be in a listing agreement. Okay? But understand in this situation, there can also be agreements between brokers. And what that's often called is the MLS system. The MLS we utilize to not only just look at properties, but it also tells you how much you're going to get for a listing. I'm going to tell you guys this because this is how real estate works. I'm going to tell you, depending on who your broker is, I follow the laws. I follow them very strictly, okay? But there are some brokers in this world that tells their agents, they'll tell them this. All right, Mr. Grossman, don't you dare, or once you go through the MLS, I know you got a lease, you're going to show Mr. Eugene a lease. Only look in the MLS for only properties that are 50% paid, okay? Even if he shows you 25%, don't you waste your time. I only want you to show him the ones that are 50%, that they're only going to pay 50% of the commission to you. Why would I tell Mr. Grossman to do that, Miss Linda? What's the reasoning behind why would I tell him to do that?
Where y'all get more money.
Yeah, I can get more money. I may not want to end up in a situation, I may want to make more money. And for me to make more money, if he's only getting 10 or 15 or 20% of a transaction, I ain't getting much cash, right? So in that situation is, Mr. Stahl, do you think that we can selectively choose what properties we show Mr. Eugene? Can I, as a real estate agent, select what kind of properties I want to show him?
No.
What is that called? Do you remember? We haven't talked about it yet. Do you remember what that word's called?
No.
Is it steering?
Steering. Because what I'm doing is I'm steering him normally to either one or two ways. It's either going to be really nice properties that's not getting any traffic, or it's going to be very ghetto properties. Okay. In that situation is you can't do that. Okay. Now, is it against the law or against the rules for if Mr. Stephan has two properties he's showing Mr. Eugene? He's showing one of them that pays 25%, and he has another one that's paying 100%. Is it against the law if Mr. Grossman goes into the first one, opens up the house? Yeah, go look around, Mr. Nose. That's the 25%. And then after you finish, then what do you think, Mr. Eugene? Yeah, it looks pretty decent. I want to think about it. And he goes to the other house, he opens it up, and he's like, now, do you notice, Mr. Eugene, in this house, it's got the custom vinyl floorings in here. It's got the quality granite here. You know, the bedrooms are very spacious. They're 8x10s and blah, 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 blah. I know this and that. Is he violating anything when he puts a lot more effort into selling that property?
Yes.
No. No. Because here's the thing. He's trying to earn his commission. Did he show both properties?
Yes.
Yeah, he did. The one thing you'll notice here is, did you ever say anything negative about the other property? Not in that situation. He walked in, he opened it. Here's the property. Feel free to walk around. And if he asked questions, Mr. Grossman answered them. But he never said anything negative, nothing down, beat it down. He just, here's the stuff, Mr. Eugene. Okay. But then he went to the other one, and he put a lot more effort into it, because the fact is, he wanted what?
Money.
He wanted him to get it, put more effort into it. But ultimately, what house could Mr. Eugene pick? Either one. Now, if Mr. Grossman goes in here and walks into the house, the first one, he goes, you don't want this dump. There's probably pedophiles all the way down the street and murderers down this way. And yeah, you don't want this house. You want to go to the other one. Now you're in trouble. Okay? It is fine that you go in and you walk over there and you end up, guys and gals, it's fine if you go in and open it up and you treat it decent. You can't, like I said, you can't beat it down. You can't go through the house and purposely make it look bad. But you don't have to put 110% effort into selling. Okay? That's real estate. But I know of brokerages and I know of people that do stuff that's in that situation where they won't show people or they'll beat them down. That can get you into trouble. I guarantee you, if I find out an agent, one of my agents did that, or they tried something like that, it'd be gone. I don't play that ball game. Because here's the thing I can tell you guys and gals, it's happened to me more than once in real estate. I went out, client wanted to go see a house, it was only paying like 15% of first month's rent. And I was like, why in the hell am I doing this? I said, it's just because I'm a nice guy. I wanted to go show this house. They'll probably lease this one. We go out there, and I open it up, I do my job, I sell the house. I'm thinking to myself, I ain't probably getting about maybe $100, $150 out of this thing. But I go show it. Sure enough, after I'm all done and they sign the lease and everything's done and the money's done, I got my 150. I get a call the next week from that person's boss. Okay? And that person's boss calls me and says, hey, are you Mr. Justin Nobles? Yes, I am. Yeah, you helped one of my assistants just got a place and she spoke very highly of you. We're actually looking to buy a $500,000 house. And she told me I needed to use you. Oh, really? Yeah, we're wanting to buy one. We've already got one that we're in right now. It's about 400 and something. We're just wanting to move up. We would like you to sell that one too. Almost $1 million because I went out and I showed this lady a crappy old house. See, in real estate, yeah, we want to go after the big dogs, but let me tell you, you never know when that person you're helping might not be what happens. And I've seen this before too. Husband and wife, they were married, they had kids and all. She was married to a doctor, but she never worked in her life. She called her husband cheating. Husband ended up divorced her. He got all the assets, and she was basically stuck with the kids with no money. She needed a place to go. Guess what, guys and gals? She didn't have much money. She only had enough to pay about $1,000, $1,200 a month. Helped her get into a place. Well, just because your husband cheats on you and all, and you're no longer a doctor's wife, she probably still has those contacts to all those friends that she knows. And let me tell you, I've got a lot of leads from that too. There's a lot of agents that will argue and gripe about, oh, I don't want to have to go show this $800 house. This piece of junk, they ain't got no money. I'm only going to make $50, $100. Yeah. But then 2 days later, they get a phone call. Mr. Grossman, you got one lead that you thought that you're like, this house ain't going to sell. And how many people have you been getting calls off of that from this one of the house you got for $800,000? How many other people has she been sending you? Several. See, in this industry, it's about referrals. Their house may not sell, but it's all about referrals. Okay. So again, when we talk about brokers' fees, guys and gals, understand that brokers' fees are not going to be discussed in the contract. It is going to be discussed within the listing contracts, okay, or the representations. Now, let me ask you real quick before we move on. Mr. Stahl, I got a question for you. Because I've actually had this happen to me, so I'm gonna ask you this. So a client ends up calls you. It's your friend, it's a good friend of yours, okay? And he says, Travis, I want to go out, I want to look at some properties, and you're my best friend, I want you to show me my properties, I want you to show me. So Travis goes out, I'm your friend, we'll say this hypothetical, I'll call you, ask you, and say, sure. So I give you about 10 properties. We go look at all 10. I end up, I say, you know what, man, I just don't like any of these. Okay, well, Justin, let's keep looking. So for about 6 months, probably over 6 months, you showed me 60 properties. Okay? And this is actually a real life situation.
Find a new friend.
You find a new friend. You go over and you showed me 60 properties. And by now, I'm kind of giving up, losing faith in you. Okay? So I go to Miss Linda, who's a builder, and I go to her and I say, Miss Linda, I'm thinking about buying a house. And Miss Linda, she says, well, yeah, most certainly. I'll get you licensed. I'll help you. Or not licensed, get you a house. I'll get you in there. So I go look at it, do plans and all. And I buy a house. How much are you entitled to, Mr. Stahl?
My commission if I have a listing agreement signed, but if not,
None, if you had nothing, right?
yeah.
So in that situation, if there was not a buyer's rep form signed, you get $0.
Then I'll fight something.
Yeah. And let me tell you, I've had that happen before. I showed about 60 properties because they're a friend. They wouldn't backstab you. Friends don't backstab you. You're right. Okay. What ended up happening, I showed them 60 properties. They went to a buyer or to a builder, signed paperwork with the builder. I got nothing. I called him and said, "Where's my money?" "We don't have nothing in writing." Like, all right, I see how this is going to be. So what happens, guys and gals, in this situation is, that was one example, Travis. Another example very similar to that. Very, very similar. But I was very smart. I worked for a broker that required me to have buyer representation agreements with all my clients. He wouldn't even let us go show a house without a buyer rep. Not even let us walk out the door without one. I had a buyer rep. And I put, I'm entitled to 3% commission if you purchase a resale house. And down in the bottom, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I don't know what the hell I was doing at the time because I was still a baby attorney. Or baby realtor, baby agent. I didn't have anybody to help me, and guess what I put down at the bottom? I said, no, down in construction, I said, if they happen to move 10% if they purchase a house where they do a new construction, 10%. So my client went and looked at, no lie, about 60 properties. And after 60 properties, guess what ends up happening? What do y'all think happened? My client went over, didn't find any houses. Not one house. He went down to UBH, United Built Homes, talked to them, said he went to buy a house, but his agent, he already had an agent, and he basically, the guy said, okay, you got your agent on. We did the entire paperwork and all. UBH told him to come straight up front. He said, I want you to know something. We do not pay realtors. We do not pay realtors. And I said, well, somebody's paying me. And so I looked at my friend and he says, Justin, I'll honor our contract. I said, okay. So I'm thinking, what? He's going to pay me how much? 3%. He's buying a new house, 3%. When it's all said and done, they bought a $300,000 house, and I got a $30,000 paycheck. Because the contract said what? 10%. New construction was 10%. Had I not had that buyer representation agreement, what would have happened? Zero. I got a Zippo. So again, in that situation is, guys and gals, you got to treat this whole thing like it's a business. I don't care if you're an attorney, you're a counselor, or whatever you are, okay? You gotta have contractual agreements. You have to. Okay, it's required. Because if you don't have contractual agreements, what ends up happening? You're not entitled to payment. And how many of y'all want to work for free in here? Not me, okay? So again, in that situation, you want to make certain that you're making some cash, okay? Now, in that situation is, we got to make certain that we complete everything properly. Now, another thing here that we're now going to get into is fair housing laws, okay? Now, this is extremely important. Y'all remember the video that we watched in the last class? If you recall, you cannot in any shape or form, you cannot go over and discriminate. Okay? So in the sale of a rental, in the sale and rental of housing, no one may take any of the following actions based upon based upon race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familiar status, or disability. Okay? let's say this, okay, and there's been more that is constantly being added to this, okay. Let's say, for example, that Mr. Eugene, he simply just does not like Asian people. He hates Asian people, okay? And Mr. Travis ends up, he is the realtor, okay? And Mr. Travis is his property manager, okay? And Mr. Eugene goes to Travis, says, Mr. Travis, how are we coming along with the tenants we're getting? And he says, well, we've got an applicant that's coming in right now, and he's an international student. He came from Asia, and he's here to go to school, and he wants to rent your house. He's paying all the fees and everything you're asking. And I just wanted to see, Mr. Eugene, would you be able to let me go ahead and approve this person? And Mr. Eugene says, hell no. I ain't written no, you know what, in Asian. What's the proper thing that Mr. Travis should do? Miss Linda, what should Mr. Travis do in that situation? Huh?
You cannot discriminate against that. I mean,
You can't. So what should Travis tell his client?
I'm sorry, you have to show the property.
Look at Mr. Travis. What did he just do? He told his client what?
See ya.
There you go.
I ain't involved in this.
Mr. Eugene, I'm sorry, but I can no longer assist you. I'm sorry, sir. I can't. I'm not subjecting my license to be revoked because of your discriminatory practices. You tell your client, I'm sorry, I can't.
So basically, by what I just said, as far as I've got to show you the house and all, I'm doing that wrong then too?
No, listen. If Mr. Travis showed the property, and Mr. Travis has a serious client that has put the money down and all and wants to rent Mr. Eugene's property, and he tells Mr. Eugene, I have a application, the gentleman is Asian, and he wants to rent your property, and Mr. Eugene says, hell no, I ain't written to you know what, and blah, 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 then Mr. Travis, number one, must tell Mr. Eugene, under the fair practice laws, the fair housing law, I have to show everyone, no matter race, religion, creed, color, sexual orientation, whatever, I have to show your property because you have put it out publicly that it's for rent. When you put it out publicly, you cannot discriminate under the fair housing laws.
Right.
If you yourself, Mr. Eugene, without me as your realtor, want to discriminate and do that, you're more than welcome because it's going to be on your head. But I'm not going to be part of it. I've had a client like that before. It wasn't even a client of mine. He came into my office. And he walked in and he told me, he said, I have 5 properties I want you to manage. And, I'm willing to pay you 10% off of each property a month. And I was going to make a nice hefty payoff of them. But his word straight to me was, I do not want you leasing my properties to any African Americans at all.
Do that.
Period. I will let you take it all, 10%, but you are not going to lease to any African Americans, period. And my response to him, because he'd given me papers, I got his papers, put them in a nice stack, handed it back to him, and I said, sir, I unfortunately cannot assist you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I cannot do that. I cannot, under the fair housing law, not only just my own morals, I wouldn't do that, but under the fair housing laws, can't help you. I'm sorry. You can go somewhere else, but I will not do that. I refuse. I refuse to end up engaging in something that could cause me to not only lose my license and lose my livelihood, but also all of my agents that are underneath me would end up losing their livelihood. So unfortunately, I can't help you. If you'd like to go somewhere else, you're more than welcome to. Or if you'll let me show the properties to everybody and you accept anybody that comes in, we might get talk. But if you're going to discriminate based off of race, I'm sorry, I cannot assist you. He was not happy. He was not happy. But I explained to him blatantly, you go to any brokerage in this area, you're probably going to get the same response. You put your houses out on the market, you will end up, you have to make certain that they are fair to anybody, period. It is not my duty to judge somebody because of their race, their religion, their color, their national. That's not my job. It's not my job. Okay? So you may be faced, guys and gals, with a situation in your life where they may be like, I don't want a certain person from a certain religion. I don't want a certain person of a certain sex. Or my favorite one that I always see, I don't want no disabled people in my house. I don't want no disabled people in my house. Okay? Unacceptable. Unacceptable. And I tell you, just in my brokerage, I'll be the first one to walk out and tell you, hit the door. I don't need your headaches, because let me tell you something. Say in this situation that Travis accepted Mr. Eugene, and he went ahead with that. The first person that comes in, when Mr. Travis calls that client up and says, I'm sorry, but my client has refused, to accept your application. The very next thing that person's going to say is, well, why? Well, your credit's great. You're a great person. You got everything just what Mr. Eugene wants, but you're just not a good fit. But why? You're just not a good fit. And then guess what's going to happen? That guy's going to do what? He's going to get on Google. He's going to search for Mr. Eugene, because they know how to do this, public information. And he's going to call Mr. Eugene. And he's going to say, hello, Mr. Eugene, this is such and such. And I applied, and your broker, your agent told me that you would not accept me. And I was just curious as to why you would not accept me. And what do you think Mr. Eugene's going to say? Oh, ain't no stinking Asian people in my house. That's why I didn't approve you. You got that? Click. Well, now guess what he just did for you, Mr. Travis? That guy's going to go call the Fair Housing Agency, and they're going to come down and investigate Mr. Travis, and they're going to go and tell TREC. So now you got the federal government, you got TREC, you got your broker, you got everybody else all now down your throat. What you gonna do here now, Mr. Travis? You want to deal with that for one client? Not at all.
I'm just gonna go to sleep.
So in that situation it ain't worth it. It ain't worth it at all. Okay, especially if you're doing property management. Okay, like one person at the college I teach at, one of the students asked one of the professors one time. I love this. One of the students asked one of the professors one time. He said, Professor so-and-so, he said, how much does it cost for me to get an A in your class? He said, well, son, it's going to depend. He said, it's going to depend on, I need enough to stay out of jail and go to Mexico and live for about the rest of my life. So probably a few, $100 million, and we might make something work. Okay? And that situation it's impossible. Okay? And it's ridiculous. Okay? So understand, you cannot refuse to rent or sell a house, refuse to negotiate for housing, make housing unavailable, or deny a dwelling because of any of these actions, because of any of these protected classes. You can't. Okay? That's why you have to make it fair. And let me tell you this too. Mr. Eugene says, all right, Travis, I got an idea. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do, Mr. Travis. Here, I got an idea. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go over and I'm going to raise the requirement for their credit. What's his credit score? Oh, he's got a 680? Okay, well, just today I'm raising it to 700. So for him to get approved, he has to have a 700 score. So that's why I'm going to deny it. Okay, that's what we're going to say. Well, here's the problem. If you deny somebody rent or selling of a dwelling or whatever based upon credit, you have to show your policies for the reason of denial. So if Mr. Eugene or Travis, you jump it up to 700, and then Miss Linda comes in and she wants to rent it, she's at a 500, and you approve her, guess what? Now it's a whole bigger ball field. Because not only did you break it under fair housing, but you also broke it under some of the Equal Credit Opportunity Acts. So now you just opened a shitstorm, basically, is what you've done. Okay? You don't want to deal with that stuff.
That is why.
That's right. It's just easier to say, bye, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Or do.
Okay? Just make it easy on that situation. You also cannot set different terms and conditions or privileges for sale or rental of a dwelling. You cannot provide different housing services or facilities. Mr. Eugene, he may be renting an apartment complex in this situation, and for everybody else, he provides cleaning and services and all, but he don't like this one person, so he just doesn't give it to them. Violation. Okay? Falsely denying that housing is available for inspection, sale, or rental. Simply lying about it. Oh, yeah, we actually had it up for rent, but we're not renting it right now. We actually are trying to sell that property. When you're really not. It's a violation. For profit, persuading owners to sell or rent. So, for example, I go into a neighborhood and I walk in and I say, oh, y'all listen up. All of these college kids are moving around here, and with the next 5 years, y'all's house, I just want you to know your house is going to be worthless. You need to sell it right now. It's blockbusting. Can't do it. Okay? Denying anyone access to or a membership in a facility or service, such as a multiple listing service related to the sale or rental of housing. Okay? You cannot deny somebody. That's one of the things we always have issues with. You cannot deny anyone access to or membership in a facility or service that's related to the sale or rental of housing. Again, the main point of the fair housing laws is, of course, to protect people with disabilities and to give opportunities to families. Okay, that is our overall goal. We want to protect individuals with disabilities, and we want to give them access for families. Now, when dealing with required disclosures, everything the seller or agents know about the condition of the property must be disclosed to the potential clients. Okay, whoever's going to buy, they have to know everything about the property. Now, I get this question a lot from my agents. Well, what happens, Mr. Nobles, if the seller does not fully disclose? What happens if I'm walking around the property and I look up and I see water damage, and the client says there's no water damage? What's the problem? Well, here's the thing. If you ever notice things, it is helpful for you to bring them to your client's attention. So if I am selling, Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda, I'm selling your house, for example, and I notice that there's water damage in your house, and you put no water damage, then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to say, Miss Linda, what about this water up here? Is this good, or what's going on? Oh, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it. It's good. Eugene just threw some water up there one day. Well, Mr. Eugene, it looks like it's been sitting there for a while. I mean, it's even water's dropping out of it. No, it's that water I threw up about a week ago. Just been up there, still dry. What will you do in that situation?
You're supposed to disclose that.
If Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda does not want to disclose, you as an agent cannot force them to disclose. If I tell you, I highly recommend you put that in there, client refuses, you need to tell them, hey, Mr. Eugene, Miss Linda, I understand. You don't put this in here, you get your ass in trouble, you'll be sued, and you both say no. I've done my job. I did my part. But Miss Linda, let's come back to the very first thing we said at the very beginning of this class. What did we say? Ask you, what was that 3-letter word?
Of your ass.
So what should I just use it verbally?
No, you can write it down.
I need to get it in writing. Put it in writing that I told you. And if I told you about it and y'all still ignored me, what happens?
You're covered.
I'm
You're
covered. Okay? But it's up to the seller. They have to provide anything that they know. Okay? Any information or reports regarding the roof, structure, electrical, plumbing, drainage, etc. must be shared with the buyer to prevent future lawsuits. Very key here. I always tell my sellers, do not ask me to ask the buyer's agent for a copy of the inspection report. Now, Travis, why would I say that?
Because you don't want to know nothing. Because once you know something, you got to disclose it.
That's right. So if me and I'm representing Miss Linda and Mr. Eugene selling their house, and it's a pier and beam house, and they haven't been under that house in years since they bought it, and Mr. Travis comes out with the client, and they get an inspector into the house, and they find out there's a ton of issues under there. If Mr. Travis does not give that to me, what happens? We're still unknown. We don't know about it. But the minute Mr. Travis emails it to me, what happens? My clients are now known, and my clients now have to fix those items. Okay. The seller's disclosure notice. It's going to be signed by the buyer. It's the seller's proof of disclosure. Paragraph 6E, 1 through 10, discloses many things to the buyer that are required by law. You use that to your favor if you're a real estate agent. You give them that seller's disclosure and you say, hey, Miss Linda, Mr. Eugene, you need to complete this. I ain't completing that. None of their business. Well, technically it is, because if you don't complete it, you're not abiding by the law, and you can get in trouble and get sued. You must complete it. Okay? Now, Travis, what do you think, sir, real quick? I want to ask you this question. What do you think if you go to Mr. Keith, you call Mr. Keith, he's your lister, he's your seller. You go to Mr. Keith, you give him the seller's disclosure, and he says, screw off, I ain't filling that out. What do you do then?
Well, I'd advise them to do it, because if not, we're in breach of contract, and that's no good. But
I ain't filling none of that crap out. It's all that governmental conspiracy bull crap and all that. That's just all, that's garbage. What do you do? Guess what you do? Here's what you do. You send them an email. You say, Mr. Keith, it is my understanding that you are refusing to end up signing or completing a seller's disclosure notice. If my understanding is correct, while I highly advise against this because of the fact is it could increase your chances of being sued, if I am correct, would you please let me know so that I can make certain to inform other agents of this matter? And if Mr. Keith writes back, you got that right, then there you go. Okay, you noticed, you put him in a notice, he refuses to sign it, you put it in email, you got it in email, it's on him. But you want to emphasize the importance of how you highly recommend he does it, and there's a huge chance of him being sued. And as long as you've done that part, you've done your job.
Can you at any time then, say, maybe you might need to find another agent or something?
No, you don't want to lose a transaction because an agent won't work, or a client won't work with you. You just need to cover your butt. You don't want to run off your clients. You just want to cover your butt.
Just curiosity there.
Mm-hmm. So again,
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
What if they don't email you back?
Okay, good question. If they don't email you back, what happens in that situation is you still have proof that you sent it to them. So if a judge ever came back and says, well, wait a minute, Miss Leela, you sent it, or, they're going to say, well, I never received it from Miss Leela. All you have to do is pull out the email showing on this date and this time, I emailed it to this correspondence or this email address, and they ended up, this is how they've been corresponding with me forever.
Yeah.
So they had to
You
have
already had
received it.
emails from them, so.
Does that make sense, Miss Leela?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am. So in that situation is, yes, there will be, and she's 100% correct there, there will be some clients that just won't email you. They just won't respond. But if that's been your main source of how you've been talking to them, it's going to be classified as their main way. And trust me, there's many ways, and that's what your broker's for. Your broker's going to walk you through it and tell you. And a lot of times, most of the time, if that was to happen, say, Travis, you actually were into that situation, I would end up in most situations, Travis, I would turn around and I'd say, okay, Travis, what's their phone number? Let me try to call them. And most of the time, they're gonna answer, and I'm gonna explain it to them. And most of the time, you can explain it enough to them where they're like, okay, I get it, I see it, okay? But again, if they won't, there's always methods around it. But Ms. Nobles, I understand where you're coming in. You're like, well, you don't want to deal with the headaches, the lawsuits. I see that. I see where it comes in. But in the same situation, I mean, if it was a $100,000 sale, I'd probably tell you, Travis, drop it.
Can you
Okay.
refer him or her to another agent, maybe in the firm?
You could, but I mean, most of the time, if it's a $100,000 sale, it's just not worth their time.
So if there's someone I don't like in the office, just pass it on.
There you go. There you go. Just send it to Miss Linda.
No.
Linda, I got something for you.
No.
Real good deal. $100,000 in their payment.
Nope.
plan.
No.
So, but in that situation, like I said, that's why you work together as a team. Everybody works together. Everybody is in this together. But most of the time, like I said, there are going to be certain times that, yes, your broker has to step in. I mean, I've had to do it many times. Steph and I've had to help you with things. It's just that's what the job of the broker is to step in and help out. But yes, I mean, in those situations, there's always a way around it. I mean, if it's a $100,000, $1 million deal, you know, we're not losing it. Okay, we're not. I've had actually a client that was $1.5 million, and he did not want to fill out a seller's disclosure. Refused to fill out a seller's disclosure. And in that particular situation, is I had to talk with them and explain to them the importance of it. And he ended up, he didn't want to fill out the TAR version. He wanted to fill out the TREC version. Now, if they want to fill out the TREC version, you can't stop them. You can't say you have to fill this one out. You have to give them the choice. Okay. But he wanted to fill out the basic TREC version, and so of course I let him fill it out. Okay, so it's up to the client ultimately, because all of this ultimately comes down, of course, to the client. When you are using other than a TREC form, you have to be aware to give those required notices by a different method. Okay, so if you're going to use another notice or whatever, you still have to give out the required notices that are stated by law. There's no option to it. Permitted disclosures. Disclosing a suicide that took place in a property is not required but permitted if the seller chooses to disclose it. Did you hear that again? Disclosing a suicide that took place in a property is not required. Okay, very key there, because I will ask you that. But it can be permitted if the seller chooses to disclose it. So if somebody in a house commits suicide, it is not something that has to be disclosed. It's optional. It's the seller's option. Now, I get a lot of students every semester says, well, I wouldn't want to live in a house where somebody killed themselves. Well, technically, we don't want to kind of cause negative juju, as they say, on a house, because if you do that, you stigmatize the property. And when you stigmatize the property, nobody wants to live in the house. Okay? And normally, if somebody commits a suicide, they normally have to clean the house out. And normally, crime scene comes out, and they clean it and all of that stuff. Okay, so the house is gone. But you will have some people. And I'll tell you this, especially for my people in Houston and in Austin too. I'll tell you this. Not so much here in Bryan College Station, but in my Houston and Austin areas, there are people that are actually what they call they're basically ghost inspectors. And there are certain people out there that want an inspector to come through to see if there's energy in the building, okay, in the house.
Sign me up.
Sign you up? So what happens is there are some people that do want that. And the reason they do that is because they know that under suicide, they're not required in Texas. So they want to bring in this expert to see if there might be ghosts. Now, here's the only problem with it. It was interesting, but I had two of them that have happened to me. When do you think the only time they can inspect the property for ghosts?
At night?
At night. At what time at night, Miss Nobles? At 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock?
No.
No, what time, Mr. Travis? What do you think?
1 a.m.
1 or 2 in the morning is when the prime time to inspect for a ghost is actually 1 or 2 in the morning. So remember in the beginning, we talked about when a seller's selling property, they have to give, reasonable time for inspections.
That ain't reasonable.
That's not reasonable, right?
Mhm.
But in their eyes, that's the only time you can do it. So if the house is occupied, guess what has to happen?
They gotta leave.
You got to find a time to allow this ghost inspector to come into the house so that they can go over and inspect the property. Okay? So, in that situation is, yes.
Ghost here. They took all your jewelry.
Yeah, your ghost, yeah.
I watched them do it. I couldn't stop.
Yeah. So yes, but in some situations is you might end up, and I laugh about it, but there are people that they are serious about that. And you take that serious. It's your job. When they hire you, it is your job. Even if you might think it's the most silliest thing, it's your job. You have to advocate for your clients, period. Okay? And I actually found some interesting stuff about how they do it. It's pretty interesting, to be honest with you. But again, if you are dealing with somebody that's, say, an hour and a half away, and you got to do an inspection at midnight or 1 in the morning, not fun.
You'd be just
Okay.
fine, Travis.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good job for me.
yeah. Also, disclosures of any registered sex offenders in the neighborhood is not required, but prohibited. Wait, I get this every semester. What, Mr. Nobles? Say what? Normally it's my older ladies in the room with children. They're always, what? You don't have to disclose that? Yeah, you don't have to disclose that. Now, I'm going to tell you something as a real estate agent. It is not recommended that you go out and you get on to the state registry and send your clients this information. Because here's your problem. That registry, just like Mr. Stephan today or yesterday found out, can the state ever be wrong, Mr. Grossman? How wrong can they be, Mr. Grossman? Extremely wrong. What happened to, real quick, talk loud for what happened to your transaction that almost killed it yesterday?
Oh, I don't know. I can't think right now.
What did title say about the title commitment?
Yeah. They said one of my clients had child support payments that they had to pay, and there was a lien on their house, so I couldn't move forward with the transaction.
Almost close to $100,000 they said this client owed in child support.
But it wasn't even him.
But it was not his. Okay? Almost killed the deal because the lien was filed on the wrong house. So in that situation, when we come back here, to the same thing with child or sex offenders, sometimes these databases can be wrong. So imagine this. Imagine in a situation that I'm showing, say, Miss Leela a property. She has kids and all, we say, and we're showing properties and all. And what ends up happening is I just get on real quick on the registry and I'm like, oh goodness, Miss Leela, you don't want to buy this house because Colton here, who lives next door, he's a sex offender. You don't want him, you don't live next to him. Okay? Well, here's the problem. That Colton that I saw might have ended up might not be the same Colton that lives next door. And if I just went over and I said that it was Colton that's the sex offender to Miss Leela, and she goes tells all her friends around town that, oh, Colton lives there, he's a sex offender, and we come to find out that it's not Colton, the one that it is, what did I just end up doing? I just slandered Colton's name. And I can be sued royally for that. Okay? That's defamation of character and everything else. Okay? So when you do this, it is okay for you to say something like this. Miss Leela, I understand you have children and all, so if you would like, ma'am, there is a registry that you're more than welcome to look at. The state holds a registry. And if you just go on Google and you type in the address, they will give you all of the sex offenders that are within, that block or that neighborhood. But I can't do it for you, but you're more than welcome to go ahead and search that database. You do not give them the address of the database either, because that also could be where she pulls it and says, well, my broker Justin just gave this to me. You just tell them you can look online. There's plenty of places online that you can look at, and you leave it. Okay? But you do not in any shape or form perform the search for your client, because what happens is if you pull wrong information, you could be sued and sued royally. Okay? Not something to play with. Prohibited disclosures. A good business practice is to never disclose anything about any of the fair housing protected classes. You can't go over and say, well, Mr. Eugene, this house that you're purchasing, it was lived in, or the owners are Asian. You can't do that, okay? You cannot say, well, this person that lived here was handicapped. You can't say that stuff. You're selling the house, you're not selling the people in the house, okay? That's how I tell people. You go in, you do not disclose information about that. That's private, confidential information. If there is HIV illness and AIDS, you cannot disclose that either. If you know, Miss Linda, that your client has AIDS or HIV, you cannot put on the MLS, attention agents, my client has AIDS and HIV, please wear gloves in house. Can't do that.
I remember that on the test too.
Oh yeah, they ask that one a lot because a lot of agents will put it on there. You can't disclose that. That's confidential personal information. Okay? A lot of people still think that if they end up, if they're around somebody with AIDS, that they're going to get AIDS. Or if they use the same toilet, they're going to get AIDS. Okay? It's not how that works, guys and gals. It's not how it works. The disclosure that a previous or current occupant has AIDS or an HIV-related illness, of course, is not required. HUD, NAR, and the Canons of Professional Ethics in TRAILA advise against disclosure, inquiry, or response regarding this issue. You cannot in any shape or form you cannot go over and say, hey, Mr. Eugene, does Travis have AIDS? You can't do that, okay? Just asking the question is a violation, okay? You cannot in any shape or form advise, inquire, or respond regarding the issue. It's private, okay? That is private, confidential issues that basically looks out for Mr. Stahl's confidential information, okay? So, again, these are protected matters that are prohibited, okay? If a client ever asks you, you know, what type of people, this is one of the biggest ones I love all the time I get this question. Well, what type of people live in this neighborhood? And I look at them and I'm like, I'm sorry, but I actually don't have like a glass ball where I can just like zoom in and know everything. I just don't have that capability yet. Well, you know what I'm saying, you know, like what type of people? I guess human beings? I don't know. You know, I'm not, you know, people will try to beat around the bush to get things out of you, especially on stuff like this, on bullet 1, race, religion, and all. They'll ask you, they'll try to rephrase it a million ways so you can answer it. And when I start seeing them trying to rephrase things, I just continue to act dumb. And eventually they're like, you're not going to give me the answer. And I'm like, you kind of catching on now, aren't you? Okay? Because the fact is, let me tell you, in real estate, guys and gals, there are people, guys and gals, that actually end up, that do send out, and they do go over and they do actually investigate. And they will put you in situations where they're wanting you, try to box you in to get you to say something. Don't you say it. You do not go into that situation, and you do not go in. They will send people into your office and say, hey, I want you to, you know, manage my property, but I don't want you leasing to any Islam people. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Okay? You say something to that extent that you will do it, putting your license and your career in jeopardy. And you don't want to do that. Okay. All right. So, guess what next class is going to be?
Practice.
The next class is going to end up being what?
Day off.
Our
No.
last class.
Another day off.
Ooh, technical issues.
It will end up being practice makes perfect. Okay. So as you can kind of see, our learning objectives for next class, we're actually going to be using a sample contract, and I'm going to give you all hypotheticals, and you all get to do what?
Fill out the contract.
You get to complete the contracts.
Don't sound too excited.
Don't get so excited, Miss Linda. Man, she is so happy in here, Stephen. She's jumping for joy.
No.
Okay? So we're actually going to fill out contracts in the next class. Okay? After we end up doing that, that will take the entire class. I'm going to tell you, it will take the entire class. Here's what I need you all to do. I need you all, especially if you're at home, I need you to print off, like this example right here, I need you to print off 1 to 4 family residential contract, lead-based paint addendum, third-party financing. Okay? Then you can see, so this was the first transaction. Here's your second. Here's your third. And then these will be your hypotheticals that we will go through. So there are going to be 3 of them that we're going to cover. But I need you to print off those forms off the Trex website. Okay? And then what's going to end up happening in this situation is you're going to print those forms off. And then what we're going to end up doing is you are going to fill out the contracts. You're going to fill out the contracts. So what will happen is tomorrow we'll come in. I will read the case sample. I will give you a few minutes to complete. You'll probably get maybe 15, 20 minutes to complete it. I'll come back on, we'll go through it, and then we'll go to the next one. We'll do the same thing. Go to the next one, okay? And what will end up happening is y'all will get practice in regards to actually filling out a contract. So I do need, for tomorrow's class, you need to print off the contracts, just like I've been showing you, and we're going to go through them, okay? Other than that, is there any questions for me in regards to not the quiz or the exam, but just any questions for me in regards to the content that we discussed tonight only? Any questions on any of the content from tonight? Okay. Nope. All right. So no questions there. All right. So let me go ahead and stop recording for this.